So in preparation for our session in the studio on Monday, the first of two sessions working on an oil sketch, I'm first going to put together some of the information I have in my pastel study of the violin maker and the studies done in Steve Burnett's luthier workshop. Because this is a kind of busy workshop, there's lots of equipment and so on. I'm going to put my violin maker in front of that description of the violin workshop. But because it's such a busy workshop, I thought it would be worth actually starting on some grey paper and allowing the mid-tone of the grey paper to basically fill in a lot of the background, rather than having, as I have here, the light background where I feel I've got to include more and more information so that it fills up a little bit and creates that busy effect. Starting on the grey, I won't have to do that. And when I come to paint, I'll tint my surface in the same way. So I'll maybe start with my subject, and I'm going to put the violin maker to just a bit to the right of the scene. I would quite like to have a bit of room on the table for some pieces of equipment. So that's how I'll have my violin maker, and what's going to be behind, I'll move it over that way a bit so we can have a bit of the cello. So I think it's well worth doing something in preparation, a bit like this. So for example, I think I want the cello a bit further over, but it would probably make more sense to go straight into my colour shapes now, actually. So I think I want to have a cello over there. One of the lovely features of Steve's workshop were these finished violins sort of suspended from there was a kind of string wire, and he had a number of them hanging. And that's quite nice, because that introduces another level of depth to the image. We've got things in front and things behind. So I want to get these things mapped out a little bit in my pastel study, just so I get a feel for how it's all going to work in a painting. So I've got most of what I want to include in my pastel study. I'm just now adding one or two darks and one or two lights, just to bring things together. And maybe particularly when we had Camachi doing those fantastic poses in the studio, one of the great things that we were able to work with were things like the angle of her head, a certain amount of information about hands. So things that are relevant to this workshop worker subject. And so I'm just trying to clarify one or two of those things in my pastel piece. I'm now going to set up to begin an oil sketch, and since we're working on an oil sketch for 2 weeks, I would like to demonstrate a way of working not unlike this approach to applying pastel, putting down shapes and then gradually refining, defining in certain places once the colour shapes are down. I want to suggest and demonstrate a way in which that can be emulated in oil paint. So basically painting without any initial drawing, trying to put down some colour shapes, which may be hard to define in the course of the first session, but will be dry and much more cooperative in the second session. So I've covered my canvas with some grey, a mixture of black and white and a bit of yellow ochre. And first, just to have a bit of an idea of where my shapes are going to go, I am just going to draw out a few lines with a brush. I've just made some brownish, a mixture of black, white, ochre and cadmium red, so that I know where my main shapes are going to be. But I am then going to apply most of the paint for this first session using bits of card and not be too definite about those colour shapes, but let the definition wait for the next session. So plot them all out, and then I'll know where to apply the colour. And because I'm using bits of card, a little bit like working with the side of the pastel, I won't get very much definition, I won't get that much precision either. And that's because I want to save that definition, save that precision for a second session. And of course, when you work in this way, rather than defining everything, because of how much has been established in the first stage of applying colour, there's usually less to do, less to define. Consequently, the image will have perhaps much more mystery to it, much more interest. It won't all be explained and defined in a... I'm going to put another violin here as well, I think. It'll be less obvious, perhaps, and consequently will have other useful characteristics. So will I put in I shouldn't really do this because I'm trying to show you how to live without the definition. But there we go, there's a few features. So I'm starting with the Craftsman, the luthier, and I'm just going to do one or two of these sort of main shapes. Dark hair is worth doing early on. And actually, because I've laid down that grey, there is a bit of mixing. But I think this is all to the good, because I really want to resist too much definition in this first session. So I'm going for a bit of grey for the shirt. So I'm going to block in these areas. I'm certainly starting just with a single colour. And then I would go on probably to make a lighter version of some of these colours. If I could possibly model most of the areas, particularly of the figure and maybe of the instruments, if I could model them with a sort of basic light and dark contrast, then I think that would be a good place to get to leave it to dry and be able to work into it next time. Before I put any paint on the face, I am just going to add one or two dark marks for the features. Because everything is wet, I've got a wet ground that I'm working into, and well, yes, I've got a wet ground, and therefore I think it's a good idea to lay down one or two dark marks both in the face and in the hands, because I'll come back to these marks and to this kind of definition, but it's quite useful to have it laid down first so that I can then work around those dark marks and restate them later in the process, but having them as a bit of a guide and also as something to work round, something that I can actually retain all the way through the process. I've picked up a lot there. I just have to move it around a bit. So there we go, get a bit of colour onto the face. I could try smaller bits of card as well. That can be helpful to get into tight spots. But I'm almost, laying down a quantity of paint and then moving it around. And this will inevitably be a rough technique. But as I say, it's really trying to emulate some of the ways in which the pastel drawings were started, with blocks of colour going down, being smudged a bit, and then being drawn into. I'm putting in that nice touch of red in the craftsman's scarf, some lighter colour for his apron. So all this is being done with bits of card, and of course that gives an approximate effect. Sometimes you get this very raised impasto colour, and if that's too much, then I can either very carefully with a palette knife take some of it off, take it down a bit, or I can wait till next week and scrape it a bit before I start introducing other colours, other definition, and so on. So I'm just getting a little bit more light into some of these areas, just to show you a kind of next stage of going from the blocking in to modelling a bit more light and shade. So there's plenty more for me to do between the craftsman figure and the workshop background. But I'll probably end my demonstration here, and we'll be in the studio on Monday with your sketches. I'll have a canvas board, probably of sort of A3 dimensions, and I will be encouraging you to, as I have done, start with probably tinting your canvas board with something grey, and then working into that with these pre-mixed colours, as I'm doing, and applying the paint with card, so that the second session will be one very much of adding definition very selectively, so that these images have a strength and an impact which comes from not defining everything, but choosing what to draw attention to by the way definition and contrast and detail are added. Okay, so see you on Monday.